just want to ask you about this call you received from the National Security Advisor, Jody Thomas, today.
Yeah, I think the most important information that that was conveyed was that CSIS did send this July 20, 2021 intelligence assessment to departments and to the National Security and Intelligence Advisor in the Privy Council office. That is in contrast with what the Prime Minister said yesterday when he indicated that the information had not been moved out of CSIS into the higher-ups. And so I think the government needs to clarify and correct the record.
To be clear, we're talking about the report that said that your family back in Hong Kong was being threatened by this one particular diplomat.
Yeah, and more than that, what the report said was that it referenced that my family was being targeted by the PRC. It also referenced that other MPs were being targeted by the PRC. Yes, so that report contained that information.
How many other MPs do you know?
I can't recall exactly.
Minister Mendicino said 49 today. Does that sound right?
No, he was referring to how many MPs have been briefed.
Fair enough.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now the critical thing to know is that the briefing that I and other MPs have received is welcome. However, it's a briefing about the general nature of foreign interference threat activities. The briefing that I received 2 years ago did not provide any specific information about a diplomat in Toronto, Mr. Wei Zhou, who was targeting my family from the consulate in Toronto. So that information was not conveyed to me 2 years ago when I had that briefing, and to suggest otherwise is incorrect.
In this phone call with Ms. Thomas today, you got it just before you went into question period, is that right?
Just about an hour before, yes.
Right, and did she indicate to you why that information wasn't passed on to the Prime Minister or to... She was not the NSA at the time,
That's
right?
correct.
Did she say who was at the time?
She did not, no.
It could have been David Morrison or someone else. But
I understand that after Vincent Rigby left the post, that Mike MacDonald was appointed as acting advisor in July and early August, and then subsequently Mr. David Morrison was appointed acting advisor until Madame Thomas was appointed in early 2022.
Based on what Ms. Thomas told you today, who do you understand would have been the NSA who received that report about your situation?
Well, it would have either been Mr. MacDonald or Mr. Morrison.
Okay, and she did not explain why the information was passed on to the Prime Minister or anyone else?
She indicated that the Prime Minister did not receive this information, nor did his Chief of Staff.
Did she say why?
No, she did not.
Are you satisfied with that explanation?
Well, I believe that the government, when it became aware of this information, that a diplomat approved by the Government of Canada to work in Canada was targeting an MP, that they should have immediately informed that MP, and they should have taken additional action to remove this individual from Canada.
Do you feel, though, somebody in the machinery of government dropped the ball by not passing on the information to, say, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who could have made a decision on the diplomatic front, and to the Prime Minister or anybody else, and the Public Safety Minister?
I don't know who exactly which departments the report was sent to. We do know it was sent to the relevant departments, right, and that it was sent to the NSIA in the Privy Council office. That's what we know. Why it wasn't acted upon is not clear.
Let me ask you a slightly different topic. The committee today, Minister Joly talking about being mindful of the consequences of declaring this diplomat PNG, persona non grata, expelling him from the country. Were you satisfied with that explanation?
No, I wasn't satisfied at all. I think once it becomes public that a diplomat is engaged in coercive and intimidating activities targeting Parliament, targeting elected members of Parliament, that the government has no choice but to have this individual removed from Canada. To do otherwise is to put a giant billboard up to the world advertising that Canada is open for authoritarian states to send agents here to conduct threat activities against Canadian citizens, and that's unacceptable.
Her implication was there would be potentially serious ramifications, retaliation. She cited the two Michaels. She referred to consular affairs. She didn't say it, but we know it, that there are 4 Canadians on death row right now in China whose case may be jeopardized.
Well, what she referenced, which I thought was an appalling lack of responsibility on part of the government to Canadians, is that she indicated that that she suggested that economic interests outweighed the responsibility of the Canadian government to protect the safety and security of Canadians, and that's unacceptable.
And consular interests too. Which is
but she did explicitly mention economic interests, and that's unacceptable. Economic interests should never trump the safety and security of Canadians here at home.
Fair enough. Have you talked to your kids about this? I mean, you know, this threat to the family, they must have heard about it?
Look, let me just say this. The issue here isn't that the PRC has been targeting family. It's not new information that the PRC targets the family of individuals that they are trying to coerce and intimidate. We've known about this for years. In fact, there have been reports, numerous reports, highlighting this inappropriate action on part of the PRC. What is new is the fact that the government did nothing when it came to their attention that a person in Canada was conducting these coercive and intimidating operations here on Canadian soil, and that's unacceptable. I have to go in the House. I've got a speech.
Last quick question: have you talked to any family in China about this?
As I've said earlier, I decided years ago, once the PRC started cracking down on Hong Kong, to sever communications with my family in the PRC out of an abundance of caution.
Understood. Thanks for your time.
Well, I don't have anything to say. You can ask me a question if you have anything.
Since you can no longer talk in there, maybe you should say some stuff about it.
Well, I definitely am prepared to do that. Well, today in the House of Commons, 2 Liberal members, senior members of the Liberal caucus, members of the government, stood up to say that the member, that Michael Chong had been briefed 2 years ago. They actually stood up to say, number one, they said fact. The Prime Minister was not briefed until this last week. But they said, but Michael Chong has known these facts for 2 years, that his family was under threat, and that there were members of Parliament that were under threat. The absurd statement is those are outright lies. Now, what was interesting is that it wasn't just that one person slipped and said that. It was when you look at the comments by Mark Garrison, followed by Kevin Lamoureux, they were nearly identical statements. I believe that the Liberal Party sent out talking points that were constructed to mislead Canadians. They were intended to sell a lie that is not true. They have no evidence that this is true, and by his own absolute word, Michael Chong has denied that he knew anything about the allegations that his family were under threat. And what the Liberal Party did today, now let's talk about this. These are 2 senior members, the most prolific speakers in the House of Commons, stood and uttered nearly the identical statement that the Prime Minister didn't know till this last week, that Michael Chong has known for 2 years, and then asked members of our caucus if Michael had shared the information with us. This is false. The Speaker has not yet ruled in terms of if or not there will be any repercussions for that false information, those lies, but he called me out for saying that these lies were in fact lies. I will continue to defend Michael Chong's honor, and I will continue to call out Liberal lies.
Can we just slow down here? What exactly
I'll go as fast as you want.
Well, you know, I'm kind of thick-headed, so I kind of need people to go slow. Just what exactly was the lie? Was the lie that the Prime Minister only knew on Monday, or the lie was the other thing?
I believe that the Prime Minister has known details of this interference for a very long time. But what I do know absolutely is that Michael Chong did not know that his family was under threat. And when 2 members of the Liberal Party, Mark Garrison and Kevin Lamoureux stand and utter almost identical statements that the Prime Minister didn't know until this last week, and that Michael Chong has known for 2 years, and then asks why Michael Chong didn't share that information with our caucus. That is a fabrication. I know that to be a conspiracy theory that is being manufactured and disseminated by senior members of the Liberal government.
Mark Garrettson apologized. Do you accept it?
What he has said is, you misunderstood me. You misunderstood me. I apologize if you misunderstood me. That's what he has said. He has not said that he apologizes for misleading Canadians and intentionally doing so. And if you look at the two statements, they are nearly identical. They are nearly identical. Garrettson and Lamoureux said it, and then the other one said it, and then it was only after multiple times that our caucus demanded an apology, hours into the debate, when they saw that the debate was being derailed by their statements, that they finally stood and said, I apologize if you misunderstood what I said. But what they said was very, very clear. They said, first, Mark said fact, if you look at the transcripts, but he made it very clear that the member from that Michael Chong had known for 2 years, speaking about the threats against his family. That is false. That is where I come from, you call a lie a lie. I called it a lie because you know what? It's a lie.
I know you're less certain about whether or not the Prime Minister knew what he knew on Monday. So you said you find it hard to believe or less believable. What tells you?
Well, I'll tell you. Today we found out there's new revelations that are being reported in the Globe and Mail as we speak, that the Prime Minister said, that contradict what the Prime Minister said yesterday. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said that the information never left CSIS, that there was no way that he would have been able to get the information because it never left CSIS. Today, we're finding out that, in fact, it did, contradicting exactly what the Prime Minister. So I have no idea what he's telling the truth about and what he's lying about, but I can tell you that he continues to mislead Canadians. Yesterday, compared to today, is a perfect example of that.
It could have left CSIS and not reached to his...
Well, these are the things. But he said yesterday, this is the point. He said yesterday, definitively, unequivocally, not accidentally, that it never left CSIS. So I don't know what he's saying that's true and what that he's saying is false, but I can tell you, I don't trust him.
On a sort of wonkish procedural question now. So you're not allowed to speak in the House of Commons until you stand up and apologize and take it back. Is that true?
Well, you know, it is a wonkish procedure. I will not be apologizing for calling them liars. I'll be apologizing for not recognizing the speaker. So it's a technical issue. Happy, you know, to chat about that later, but I will tell you, I believe that the Liberal members stood today and lied about Michael Chong. I stand by that, and I will continue to stand by that.
Thanks, folks.
Awesome.
Ali in committee was being asked about possible diplomatic response, potentially expelling this diplomat, and she warned about the possible consequences. One of them, she said, was economic. I wonder if you could talk about what would be the concern from the government's point of view about getting into a diplomatic feud with the PRC right now. What kind of response would you be worried about?
Well, I'll let Minister Joly speak about the specifics, but I'd say we have to speak from a position of principle, and we will always be there to defend our democracy. And I think that one of the things that we've been doing over the last few years we've seen is kind of diversify markets. You know, now we're the only G7 country which has a free trade agreement with all other G7 countries. Right. So we have a network, I would say, of trade agreements that allow us to, our businesses to be able to export in different markets. So I think that when you look at these things, you know, at geopolitics, you have to do first what's right. And I think that's always what is the driving force in what we're doing. And I can tell you that, you know, we've been winning more than ever. You know, more companies than ever wants to come to invest in Canada. Recently, we had Volkswagen. So, you know, I feel very confident that, you know, we can stand our ground and at the same time be able to attract investments from around the world.
It wasn't that long ago. I remember being on one of those PM trips. I think you might have been along as well to China. And there was talk about getting a framework to begin negotiations on a free trade agreement. That's obviously completely
Well, the
gone by
world
wayside,
has
but
changed.
world
You
has
know,
changed.
the world has changed. The world has
to what
changed.
extent does this economic relation, do those considerations though factor into the diplomatic relationship?
Well, I think you first do what's right, and then these questions come second. I would say that the world has changed significantly from 2015 or 16 and where we are today. China has changed as well from that moment to now. And I think the position of Canada is very well aligned with the position of our allies around the world and our partners. And what you've seen also, in my view, you've seen kind of a realignment of supply chain. You know, we went from global to more regional with the area in the United States. That's why you've seen a realignment. And I think people come to Canada because also they want their supply chain to be aligned with their values. You know, people would rather be in a jurisdiction where you have strong labor laws, strong environmental laws, proximity to resources. And I think in that world, Canada shines.
I understand you don't want to speak on behalf of Minister Joly, but you've been in that role before, and you're aware of consular issues too. I know it's a pressing issue for foreign affairs ministers. To what extent do you think those are weighing on her as she considers possible response diplomatically to the interference, particularly the fact we have, I think, 4 Canadians on death row in China?
Well, I think you start from the basis of doing what's right. I mean, that's what I've always done in all portfolio when I was foreign minister or as minister of the industry. You start with principle. You start with doing what's right for Canada and Canadians. And like I said, that's what guided me. And for the rest, you would have to ask her in terms of our framework. But if you ask me, in that role, I always started with doing what's right. And even at the time, you remember, we put forward the declaration against arbitrary detention. We did what's right because we wanted to give a voice to those states who want to have people voiceless. And we stand, you know, on principle. And I'm very proud of what we have achieved back then and what we're doing today.
Thanks for your time.
Merci. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll see you at the convention.
Yes, thank you. We've just seen the minister set up an inquiry here into what's happening, an investigation, I believe it's called, into the spill at Kearl. And there are 2 different spills at Kearl. One happened last May and one happened this February. This February was responded to quite quickly, and the right parties were notified as far as that one goes. The issue that we heard over 3 days of hearings at the Environment Committee here in Parliament was that there was a lack of communication about what the water was like between the spill in February and what happened after that. And that's unacceptable. The Alberta Energy Regulator said it was unacceptable. Yes, it is unacceptable. Imperial Oil said it's unacceptable. It is unacceptable. We need to have protocols here to make sure that people that live downstream from our facilities know that their water is safe. And this is what we're after here. The Alberta government's already set up because they've seen the hole the regulator has here. And yes, the regulator is the person, is the body responsible here for reporting to people affected by this, in our opinion. It's a quasi-judicial body set up so that there is no political interference in this whole matter, and yet they failed, it appears in this case, to actually notify the communities that they had safe water. Now that is a failure that has to be fixed. There's a group set up by the Alberta government, because it is, in the end, their regulator. That group is the Fort Chipewyan Working Group, and I'd like to see how Minister Guilbeault is seeing how this will work together with that group, because the last thing we need is more diffuse responsibility about informing people about the quality of their water. We need direct reports immediately to make sure people know that their water is safe.
Do you think the AER should be disbanded?
Well, disbanded is one thing. The whole thing is, what do you replace it with in the meantime? It's been talked about for a decade. I remember even in private industry in Alberta, most of us were saying, what is this organization good at this point in time? Because it's non-communicative. If you'll see the testimony, we say aloof to the people that it actually has to communicate with. Yes, there are things clearly wrong with this regulatory body, and I think this points it out in spades. Recognize that 4 years ago it had an executive that actually was caught more or less with his hands in the cookie jar. So it's been a rebuilding process for quite some time here, but as I say, those problems with this regulator have gone back for over 10 years now.
And do you think maybe the federal government should just step in and regulate the oil sands?
It's an interesting question. I don't know what the federal government regulates well right now. Every time they're actually regulating something, they actually seem to be stalling on what they're doing. You take a look at the Impact Assessment Act, everything's delayed. So they're not actually getting things done when they have the regulatory authority. I don't know how moving into the province's jurisdictional responsibility is going to make that any better at this point in time.
So what's the role that you think the federal government or even, MPs in the House should play when a body like this, in your words, kind of screws up? Is it just really kind of pointing the finger and kind of, publicly shaming them?
I think our role is to make sure that there are processes in place. So it's the Alberta Energy Regulator. This whole thing about quasi-judicial bodies, regulators that aren't accountable to any political source along the way, perhaps needs to be examined about whose head should roll on this, because frankly, the job wasn't done. So we have to have a reporting mechanism that works well for the people that are served by there. We've got to make sure we actually look at the entire regulatory process here, because as you know, in Canada, it's a confederation. So there's jurisdiction the provinces are responsible for, there's jurisdiction that the federal government is responsible for. With the water here and with the Indigenous communities, the federal government has some responsibilities. To make sure we're not duplicating what these two levels of government are doing, we need to make sure they're working together, but that responsibility for communication about the quality of the water needs to be direct between the regulator and those communities so they know immediately if their water is safe and when it might not be safe.
Do you think the head of the Alberta Energy Regulator should be fired?
I'm not going to comment on whether one person, we're going to wait to see what happened here in this process, but there does have to be some accountability for this. In the real world, there's accountability for things that don't go right. So at some point in time here, we're going to have to put some accountability on this body, and the buck has to stop somewhere, and I think Mr. Pusher understands where that is at this point in time, because his organization clearly failed in getting the public good done in this case.
And it seemed like you mentioned at committee that there's been problems for years at the AER. It's not recent.
That's correct. I mean, Mr. Pusher's been there 3 years, been cleaning up a mess. As I say, the people that came before him were literally caught setting up a different organization where they were getting paid and the government was paying their overhead bills. So it has been a mess for quite a while.
Both Liberals and Conservatives often say that, this is an industry that is the best in the world and the last barrel of oil should come from the cleanest provider. What do you think this incident, or incidents like these, does to, the ability for us to say that to the world when they're calling us to, phase out fossil fuels?
Take a look at what happened here at the end of the day. If they take a look at the seepage that happened, in the end, although it took too long to communicate, nothing got leaked into the water. People were just unsure for 9 months. When the spill happened, the response was very quick, and the nature sweeps, I think there was some overflow into some fish-bearing ponds at that point in time, and that was quickly dealt with, and that's why the federal government got involved. So think about that, how quickly that happened. So there has been no spill at this point in time that has affected bodies of water that people are dependent upon. We do need to make sure that the chance of that is as minimized as possible. That's our role. We need to make sure that that's enforced. But that is still, you take a look at the industry itself, it's still enforced by a strong regulatory regime that so far has upheld the safety of the people of Alberta, the people of Canada, the people it serves.
Sorry, one quick question. Are you satisfied with the documentation that was provided to the committee during the 2 hearings with Imperial and the AER? So
Imperial provided the follow-up the follow-up emails so far, and pages and pages and pages of them. The AER has also provided their communication so far. We're also waiting for the confidential information, which has to come from some of the Indigenous bands, because there's Indigenous benefit agreements that are impacted here, as well as where the Alberta Energy Regulator has a process as well about who they have to notify of certain outcomes first, and putting out things before they find out the actual facts to parliamentary bodies is going to be something that they have to address through their process as well. So thank you.
Thanks, folks. Okay.